Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the co-owner of the online comics retailer Discount Comic Book Service, or DCBS, and In-Stock Trades, as well as the co-owner of the comics distributor Lunar Distribution. It's Christina Merkler. Thanks for coming on, Christina.
Thanks for having me.
So, first question I have for you, it's a very big one. Are you still dreaming of Italy?
Yes. It's funny because 8 years ago I went to London for the first time, and ever since I've always said I was going to retire in London. And I've been to London like 4 times now. But 2 years ago I went with my sister and brother-in-law to Italy, and I changed my tune. And I think that's where I actually prefer to retire, and then just go to London whenever I feel like it because it'll be so close.
You just came back, though, right? I mean, recently you went to Italy and you went to New York Comic Con. It seems like everyone in comics is always traveling right now.
I know. It was actually it was not my choice to do it and return the week before New York Comic Con. My sister turned 50 this year, and her best friend turned 50. And so she said, hey, this is what I want my trip to be. And so it was a family trip. All the kids, my parents went, my 73-year-old parents went with us, and we were there for about 10 days, and it was great. I loved showing my kids the places that I loved to see when we were there. And then we also got to see a lot of new stuff too, and do new stuff. So
I know this is not comic book related whatsoever, but you said this is the new place that I want to end up at. Is there a part of Italy that is like your Italy? Are you like a Tuscany person, a Milan person? Oh, you're Tuscany?
I'm definitely Florence, Tuscany. Actually, Umbria is probably where I'd like to end up, which is near, it's all in the same general region. And I've done Rome. I've done Amalfi Coast. We did Ischia on our last trip, which is the island that everyone who's Italian actually vacations at instead of Capri.
Right.
And I've been to Milan, but only in the train station, which is beautiful. But we went to Cinque Terre this year, though, and we went to Venice. I loved Venice, would never want to live there. And I love Cinque Terre, but that is one where there are just too many people.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there are just too many tourists. So somebody told us to check out Puglia next time, and that you might like that as far as where we end up, because it's also coastal, but it's less known than Cinque Terre. So
my favorite is probably Siena, and I know that's pretty heavy with tourists too, but it also allowed me to fulfill my lifelong dream of renting a Vespa and driving through wine country. For some reason, ever since I was a child, I think it was because I saw a movie where this happened. I wanted to rent a Vespa and drive through Italy, and I did that, and it was magnificent. I also was horrifically hungover that day, so it was kind of best of both, where it was like a mixed experience, but at the same time, yeah. But we can't talk about Italy too much. More relevantly to this conversation, you were also recently at New York Comic Con, as I mentioned, where you had the quite fancy sounding Lunar cocktail event during Wednesday's retailer. How was it? How was the convention this year?
New York Comic Con was weird this year.
Interesting.
I don't know if it was just because I was weird or being weird and tired and exhausted. They had a full day of retailer events, and then we had the mixer at night. And the original plan was that we were the kickoff mixer the night before. So I was afraid, everyone's going to be exhausted and not want to engage in the mixer. But it was fine. It was great. We had an incredible turnout. And the publishers had a lot of great creators that came up and talked. And that really made a big difference. And we told our publishers that generally speaking, our retailers like to hear from the creators themselves, because they're the ones that are so passionate about it and they get everyone excited, which is exactly what happened. And so it was very well attended, and it's always a lot of work, but it's generally worth it. So we also were able to go out for drinks afterwards with a few retailers in DC, and it's nice to actually have face-to-face contact with our retailers, because so much of it's done online.
I know Scott Snyder presented that night or talked that night, and I'm pretty sure he could get my cats excited about comic books, and they don't even know what comics are. That man's enthusiasm is like, I don't know, a superpower.
It is. And that's what I love. Like, every time they say, well, can Scott talk? I'm like, of course he can talk. Like, first of all, it's because he's Scott Snyder. But second, because I know he's going to get everyone psyched about it. And there's nothing like having somebody who's like so committed and really genuinely cares. Not that any of the creators don't, because they all care. Just some of them are really good at getting people hyped. Like he's one of the best hype men, I think, in comics right now.
I remember one time I did a podcast with him and he just like literally walked me around his house showing me different pieces of art. And it was just because he had such like intense enthusiasm. He's like, don't tell anyone, I just got this new piece of art from Chalk. I'm like, this is terrible audio podcast material, Scott, but I respect the hell out of what you're doing right now.
Right.
I do have to ask, you said it was kind of weird. Was it weird relative to New York Comic Con, to conventions in general, or what was it?
I think, this is the first year I didn't step one foot on the show floor. And New York Comic Con, yeah. So when I was talking to one of our publishers, they asked me how it was because they ended up not coming this year. And I said, New York Comic Con's always been my favorite con. I don't know why. It just always has been. Well, I know why. It's because they have the best artist alley of any con, period. There's no question about it. And this year I didn't even get to go to Artist Alley. And I had meetings, but it wasn't, I don't know. It was just I was disconnected, I think, it just in general from it. And because there aren't major publishers or publishers that, I used to go and I'd hit Image and I'd go to the Marvel booth and I'd go to the DC booth and then I'd check out all the small pubs and I would do like all the independent pubs and I'd stop by CBLDF because I'm on the board, and then I would, and we always have a CBLDF meeting in New York. And so all of those things weren't what I did this year. I mean, I did the CBLDF meeting, but even that was like in a different place and not like it normally was. And we did leave early this year. Like we left Saturday morning instead of the Monday that we had planned because we had a few meetings get changed around, and it's really expensive to be in New York. So I was like, well, I have my whole team here. We're going to save, a few $1,000s and just go back early. And then they don't lose Monday and Tuesday at work and they can rest over the weekend. And so those are just like little things that we're starting to tweak when we decide what we do next year. Because last year for Lunar, we did breakfasts. So that was like our thing. We did breakfast at each of the events. And this year we're like, let's just do something different. See if we can get some different people engaged. Maybe retailers don't want to get up that early in the morning and go to a breakfast. Maybe they want to do something later in the evening. And it seems to have worked. Like all of our events at Emerald City, at C2E2, at San Diego, and at New York were all very well attended. And people really liked the mix and the way that it was set up. So I think that's going to be our thing, but we're always going to change it. We don't want it to ever feel like it's the same thing every time and it's a chore. So next year may be totally different. We haven't quite decided yet.
I do think it's interesting, like you mentioning the publishers not being there. I was talking to somebody else who works in kind of the comics press, and they were saying that New York Comic Con doesn't really seem like a Comic Con in some ways. But I think it's interesting where San Diego Comic Con is like all the publishers are there. That was the thing that I think surprised me the most about going this year. And New York Comic Con, you're exactly right. All the creators are there. Like this year's lineup was insane in Artist Alley. And it's interesting. I kind of wish you could get both in one location, and like then you could have all the creators and the publishers, but I guess that doesn't always work that way. But one more question about those events for you. I think one of the things that's interesting about you in particular is you wear multiple hats in a very specific way, in an unusual way for somebody that works in comics. You are both a retailer and a distributor. When you're at a convention, do you need to define meetings where you're like, this time I'm DCBS Christina, and this time I'm Lunar Christina, or is it blurrier than that?
It was a little blurrier than that this year because at New York Comic Con specifically, I met with a new publisher who wanted to speak to us from both aspects. They wanted to give us information and talk to us about distribution. It's Ignition Press, so they're already out. It's not like this is anything, but we had a meeting with them, and they also were like, and we'd like you to know for DCBS sake and in stock trades, because they want to receive our feedback as a retailer as well as a distributor. And I loved everything they were saying. I'm really excited about the plans that they have, which are not like detailed plans. It's just that I'm really excited to see what they seem to understand and get everything and know exactly what needs to happen to make them successful. So I think that they're going to do a great job.
they have a lot of experience in that
Yeah,
place. Yeah. I mean,
right.
put together Philip Sablick and Jamie S. Rich alone. That's like
Yeah.
decades of experience of running a publisher to some degree.
And they know, I mean, they know everything. So what I mean by that is Philip absolutely has the ability to know exactly publishing from, soup to nuts. And then Jamie on the editorial side, which is a huge part of it, right? So yeah, no, I'm excited about that. But that is the only meeting. All the other meetings were either Lunar or they were DCBS, but they always blur because, I mean, that's what we bring to the table as a distributor is that we happen to own a large retailer as well. And so we can give them that feedback and that kind of information, which is really nice.
Well, it's funny. One of the things I talk to with writers a lot, particularly, I mean, namely ones that also draw, is that if you're a writer who also draws, you understand what you're putting an artist through. And so you know that. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the interesting things for you is like with that line being blurry, as a distributor, I bet you can communicate to publishers what retailers are going through with more clarity and like being able to help them understand better what's happening because you understand it. You are a retailer yourself.
Yes. And, we get a lot of feedback. So I'm able to give them the feedback on that in addition to my own feedback. And I mean, the joke is, and it's not a joke, you talk to 10 retailers and ask them a question and you get 10 different answers. And that is exactly how it is. And unfortunately, there are some creators who will ask questions of very specific retailers that have very specific needs and give them very specific answers. And the publishers, I'm sure, find it wholly frustrating. They don't want them to not talk to their retailers. It's just that like there are 2,500 out there that you have to consider. And, we're all our own small business. So it's important to like give the scope. And we try to do that as much as we can with our publishers and just saying, hey, for smaller stores, this would work better. For larger stores, this would work better. For online stores, you have to take this into consideration. For multi-chain stores, you have to take this into consideration. And so we do kind of have that ability to give them that kind of feedback.
I think the best illustration of the 10 retailers having 10 different ideas type of idea that I've ever experienced was, I remember I was putting together one of my retailer features and I talked to Jen King from Space Cadets Collection in Texas. And one of her top sellers was this book, I think it was called Anne Bonny. And I had never heard of it. And I asked other retailers and they were just like, I don't even know what that is. And she's like, it killed for us. And I was like, comic shops, that's just how it works sometimes. Like if you have the right audience for the right book and you believe in it and you sell it, Anne Bonny's your top hit. There it is. It's weird.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, that leads into, I do want to talk to DCBS Christina right now, or more specifically DCBS in stock trades. I like doing check-ins throughout the year with retailers to just get a sense as to what you're seeing. What kind of year has it been for you over in both those houses?
It's been weird.
That's the theme.
Yeah, it's been weird. It's been weird because the thing is, in-stock trades is so different from DCBS in that as far as what they see in sales. Okay. So January of this year was the biggest month in-stock trades has ever had in the history of in-stock trades. Wow. I'm talking over November, December months. And we've been saying this to publishers for the last few years. Like our January and February's for collected editions are just bonkers. Like there are some reasons for that. A lot of people are getting to where they, especially collectors, they save up their money, they save up their Christmas money. And then in January, they get their tax refund and they just like go nuts. Right. And there isn't a whole lot of periodical activity that we're seeing in the first few months of the year. So they start looking for collected edition. So I think that's why in-stock trades is like that. DCBS has been pretty flat through the first 6 months. And I think that is kind of like, it's funny. A publisher I talked to last week told me, they said, I don't think you'd be surprised. They went to DCBS and asked for feedback. They went to like a graham cracker. They went to a Coliseum. They went to multiple different types of retailers. And they said, their, like mix of product and what they're selling is very similar to you. And what that tells me is that, the fan base is pretty predictable, maybe. And the only thing that really changes is like you said with Jen, like if you have somebody who really loves something, they can really make it an incredible seller for their store. It just may not move the needle in the overall, industry, but you still have your standard people who are going to buy Marvel, whether Marvel doesn't even print it on paper anymore. They can print it on tissue paper and they'd still buy it. Or, somebody who it doesn't matter. They'll follow a creator and it doesn't matter what they put out. They're always going to buy that. I think the struggle for all retailers right now is we're good at maintaining. We're great at it. Like our numbers aren't down. They're not, like generally speaking overall. We're just trying to figure out how to grow the readership because, we're great at taking care of people who want what they want, right?
Right.
We just need to figure out how to get new readers that like could possibly want to read comics and just don't even know they want to.
Yeah.
Example, my son's girlfriend has never read a comic in her life. And my daughter, Mackenzie, manages the DCS warehouse. So she was like, Savannah, you've got to read, and she loves true crime. Savannah does. She watches everything. So she gives her a bunch of books. They're a bunch of image books. And Savannah read all of them because she's just a voracious reader anyway. And she thought, yeah, I'll go ahead and do it. And she loved plastic. Okay. From Image. And she was like, just the other night, she asked me, she goes, hey, have they come out with something new? I go, yeah, they have a mini series. She's like, I loved that. I thought that was so great. And that was like the favorite of all of the things that Mackenzie gave me, which wouldn't have been what I picked for her. Like, even as like a person who's a salesperson and knows how to sell comics to people, that wouldn't have been the first one. But it just like, it really like, connected with her in some way.
Yeah.
And I thought, if I can get Savannah, who has never read a comic in her life, would have never, like, how can we do that? That's the key, right? That's what we need to do, is figure out how to get people who wouldn't necessarily, and she's like, I'll buy it. I don't even care. I just want to read, what they have next. Like, that's the golden, thing to make it work.
I do think that's the tricky part about DCBS and in the way that you do things is the fact that you're going to get people who come to you because they want the comics and they know they want the comics. But for the people who don't know what they want, it's not like there's a storefront where you can go through and you can like look through this stuff and find that. It does make me wonder if there would be like a benefit for you to have like, I don't know, did you ever take those BuzzFeed quizzes they used to have where it's like you answer 20 questions and it spits out like the one thing? Yes. Have a BuzzFeed quiz for somebody like Savannah. It's like, all right, you like this, you like this, you like this. All right, here's a list of 10 things you might like. That's your discoverability tool. That's the tricky thing, though, is like, how do you build discoverability into a purely online experience for something that's very tactile, like a comic book? I'm sure you struggle with that all the time.
We do. And what we've tried to do is like, okay, if a publisher is doing some sort of incentive, right? Like, hey, buy this and you get an extra 10% discount. The way that we do it is we just give the customer the extra 10% discount in the hopes that they'll just try it.
Right.
And that does work, generally speaking. There are times where we've had publishers say, hey, can you just give out this number one free? We'll send you 5,000 of them. Send it to every one of your customers. Let's see if they'll at least just read a free book. And that has happened and has worked sometimes. I think there's a lot of variety, and there's almost, I hate to say it, but almost too much out there.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
There's almost too much to choose from, that I think that there are a lot of things that are getting missed because people, like everything's so focused and there are so many algorithms. Like DCBS doesn't have an algorithm in there, so like you just buy what you like and whatever. But even in an Amazon, looking at Instagram, right? I only see the things that they're very specific, and I know that I'm missing out on a lot of great stuff. And that's what I hate about it. So the only thing that, the only way that works is you go into a store and you have to figure out, but the stores can't carry everything. So that's the other problem, right? Because they're going to carry what they like themselves, what seems to sell, but they can't carry 3,000 titles of collected editions to, so like, how do we win? I don't know. I mean, I wish I knew. I guess I double the industry's sales if I could figure it out, right?
No kidding. It is, I have this long-standing theory. It's something I apply to a lot of things. I always call it the big menu theory. It's like when you go into a restaurant and there's too many things to choose from, and you're just like, you just kind of panic and you're like, I guess I'm getting pancakes for dinner, whatever. Streaming services have this problem too, where it's like there's so much choice. You find people just scrolling for like an hour. I'm like, congratulations. You just are filling people's time with like searching for something they might want to watch. But it is an interesting and tricky thing. I do want to say, to back up to something you said about in-stock trades doing really well in January, I've long had this idea that, and I'm not saying that retailers are wrong about this, or distributors or publishers or whomever are wrong about this, but there's this idea that the first quarter is always going to do poorly compared to the rest, that it results in them publishing less and rolling out fewer big books during that time, where it becomes kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy where the stuff isn't there. And so like, look, people didn't buy it. And I'm like, well, look what happens. Ultimate Spider-Man #1 rolls out in January. And what does it do? Lights the world on fire.
Right. That's what I've been trying to we've been telling publishers this for years, fill up your first 2 quarters. And I think this is the other thing. Everyone's become so risk averse, including retailers, that retailers are like, we're exhausted. Just give us standard stuff, January, February, March. And it's like, no, I want crazy. It was kind of like retailers would say, we're done with it. We're tired of events. Well, we might be tired of events. That doesn't mean our customers are tired of events, because they're not. They love events. I have very few customers who are like, I'm really tired of, having another event to buy. No, they're not. They're excited, but it can be exhausting for a retailer.
Yeah.
But the same thing goes for Q1 and 2. Cameron loves the expression front loading. Everything's front loading with him. The pick is front loaded, the pre-pick is everything has to be done at the beginning. And that's how I feel like our year should be. They should be front loaded. So we're just coasting by the end of the year, because then those are free sales. What I feel like happens, unfortunately, is that some of these really big events that come into Q3 and 4 could have been even bigger if they were really built up at the end of the year and into Q1 and 2. I think they would do even better.
Yeah.
Because there's so many people, once you hit Q4, no one's thinking of anything, it feels like. Even our own consumers, they're consumed by the holidays, by year end, by, all the craziness that ensues with that. And really what we should be doing is making them super excited in Q1 and 2.
That does bring up an interesting comparison. I do want to talk about what's working for you. They're 2 different things. It's easy to make the comparison between Ultimate Marvel and Absolute DC because they're comparable things. But one did launch in January and the other one launched in October. Do you feel like, I don't know, is it too early to tell whether or not the timing was a difference, or what did you see with those 2? It's too early.
I think it's too early to tell, because there are also 2 things, right? So Marvel has had ongoing events over the years. So Ultimate was exciting because it was a little new and different, but DC hasn't had a major event in years. So I think that whether they did it in March, whether they did it in July or October, it would have been big this year because people were ready for an event.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's it. I think they had the right people on the event books, which is a big part of it, but in both cases, for Marvel and for DC. And I think by maybe February or March, we're going to really see whether the timing had anything to do with it. But I believe that DC has a longer term plan to actually have this whole thing go into Q1, Q2, and Q3 into next year. So that, to me, is what's even more important, is not to just have the big event, but to continue it through and then see it as a more long-term type of excitement. That's what people are really looking for.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Warning, warning, warning. You have been reported by Oni Press for possession of Skin Police #1, the visceral and violent vision of 22nd century hyperaction, coming to comic shops this October. In the year 2142, fertility levels will plummet, illegal clones will become a thriving underground black market for desperate families, but unbeknownst to everyone, 3 in 4 of these genetic duplicates will degenerate into psychologically unstable killing machines at some point in the life cycle. Whoops! Fortunately, the United States of Europe has decided to take up the unenviable task of hunting these human time bombs before it's too late. To the government, they're the duplicate, identification, and capture division. To everyone else, they're the skin police. The worst part of the job? It's always the one you least suspect. From rising stars Jordan Thomas and Daniel Geet comes the page-turning science fiction spectacle 2024. Skin Police #1 in comic shops everywhere this October. And now, back to the show. You know, it's funny. I hadn't really thought about, Ultimate Spider-Man and Ultimate Black Panther and Ultimates and Ultimate X-Men, and then Absolute Batman, Absolute Wonder Woman, and Absolute Superman. Those are all really big books, but you could kind of almost you're kind of phrasing them as events. They are kind of events because they're a focal point rather than just a single story. It is a very siloed type of thinking where you're this is this and this is that and never the twain shall meet. But really there's a lot of overlap between the ideas. It's really about having kind of that push, All In. All In is kind of an event. It's just kind of a decentralized event.
Right.
So, you said that you're flat, and I do want to note for listeners, flat is not necessarily bad. Flat just means level.
Oh, yeah. And that was probably, I'd say end of June. So because there wasn't a lot that was put out in the first 6 months overall, right? We were, and by flat, it could be we're up 1%. I haven't really looked at the numbers and I don't until the end of the year because it doesn't even matter anymore. I know that other people have more time than I do to do that. But generally speaking, once I hit, January, then I'm really kind of dissecting the previous year. What I can say is DCBS still has growth, but I think that concern with growing the readership is much greater with us than it is, a regular brick and mortar, because a regular brick and mortar has the opportunity to bring in new people just by virtue of where their location is, if they change sort of marketing tactics, things like that. But as you very adeptly said, I don't have the ability to do that other than changing marketing tactics. But as far as, and we have actually talked about it, we're talking a website revamp. We're talking adding specific things to try to get new, because it's honestly, DCBS is set up for somebody who already knows comics. Yeah. That's it.
And that's tricky.
Or it is not for a newbie at all. And so we need to, and that's what we've been talking about internally. And probably in January or February, we're going to do a pretty major overhaul of DCBS and In Stock Trades, the sites and the way they function and the way that they are intuitive to the new person that comes to the site.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the actual product, though, particularly on the DCBS side, do you have a sense as to what's working with your customers?
Yeah, the thing is that I probably shouldn't say this, but I will. When I analyzed our business from last year, there were approximately, I think, 143 publishers that we had sold through DCBS.
Uh-huh.
Whether it was through PRH, Lunar, or Diamond. And the top, I think it was 80, were 97% of my business.
Makes sense.
So then you look at that 3% and you're like, do I just not offer that 3% and save my team a heck of a lot of work for that 3%? But you don't want to not offer everything. And this is the same problem that brick and mortar stores have. They want to offer as much as they can, but they also know that, there's only so much work you can put into it to get, any payout for it as well.
That's also why so many shops order just for polls or polls plus one or something like that, because it's you need to know you're going to make that sale, especially on the books that you don't necessarily know enough about to hand sell with confidence, like Aunt Bonnie with Jen King.
Right. Well, and that's exactly right. So, you order it, somebody has to, put that effort in to determine to order it. Then it comes in and you have to have someone check it in, and they have to check it against the manifest, and they have to check it in and either put it on a shelf or determine where it goes. And then if you don't sell it, then you're just, out that, or you have to liquidate it at some point. With DCBS, it's all sold, right? So it is sold, which is nice. And we don't buy extras or order extras, but I still have to pay somebody to check it in and put it on a pick spot and then later pick it. And then my margins aren't nearly as high as a brick and mortar store. So at some point you just say, is it worth the 25 cents I made on that? to do all of this work, because it may not be. And, we will have to make that decision. But I think every brick and mortar retailer already has to make that decision, because they don't have a 70,000 square foot building to, put it in a staff of 20 or 25 people. So that is the biggest challenge. And the thing is that there's always a personal element to it. The retailer, it's hard for the retailer they know who they like. They know they only have so much time to read so many PDFs and all of the descriptions of all of the new stuff that are coming out. And so it's really a guessing game, unless we have some other incredibly amazing ability to, stop time so that we can read and do all the things we need to do to make an informed decision. So, I mean, that's the biggest struggle. We encourage our publishers to give PDFs, but then we also have to realize, okay, if every publisher really gave a PDF,
oh my God,
they'd never be able to, they wouldn't place their orders. They wouldn't even know what to do. So it's tough. It's tough to highlight what you think is the best each and every week.
Well, and sometimes the best isn't necessarily what somebody else is going to respond to, because everyone is so, everyone has their own taste. I mean,
right.
This is not me saying this book doesn't do well. I have no idea how well it does, but I really love Wyatt Kennedy and Luigi Formisano's Knights. It's an Image series, and I've talked it up as much as I possibly can. But at the same time, maybe what's interesting for me is not necessarily going to be for everyone else. But I remember when we did my mid-year check-in and I talked to you, it seemed like the idea that nostalgia books were kind of doing really well. Has that kind of maintained, the kind of your Thundercats and your Transformers and the stuff we loved when it was the 80s and everything like that?
Well, I mean, I think it goes to show G.I. Joe just sold 200 and some thousand copies. And,
right.
That tells you right there. But also, I think, yes, what my hope is that they don't overdo it.
Right.
Because once it starts working, then they go, okay, that's all we're going to do then. And the focus shouldn't be that. It should be, we should do this and continue to do this, but not, facsimiles were a big thing. And now you see facsimiles everywhere. And it's like, okay, I think we're going to dilute it at this point, and then it's not going to be as cool as it was. But then, DC's Finest just came out and it's doing great. And that is nostalgia all bottled up in really great little collections. And, Cameron got super psyched about the cover that we got on our Green Lantern Omnibus exclusive that we did, because it was his first Green Lantern cover. It was his first Green Lantern was okay, let me get it right. I think it was number 90. It was either 90 or 190, but I think it was 90. And I think Superman was 302. And, he got that cover on the Insect Trades exclusive or whatever that we did for the omnibus, and he was thrilled. And it's that nostalgia, right?
Yeah.
And it did really well for us, so that's all that matters. But I do think nostalgia, but I think that they're going to have to back off of it a little. Everyone likes nostalgia, but we want original too. And that's, nostalgia is great until, you need new people coming in and you need original stories.
Yeah, I mean, that's the tricky thing, right? Is nostalgia speaks to the people who are already shopping in comic shops, because they're the perfect demographic. But if you don't have anything new, how do you get those new readers that you're talking about? That's the challenge there. I do think it's interesting, though, because I wrote a piece recently about something I've affectionately called microlines, which is Energon Universe and Ultimate Universe and the Absolute DC and all the stuff like that. And one of the things that came up when I was talking with shops was, it's going great right now. These are doing really well for us. It's helping us get lapsed readers and even new readers to some degree. That was one of the things that came up with Ultimate Spider-Man, is I heard a lot of new readers were coming in. But the trick, though, is every one of them was just basically it can't get too big too fast. And some of them were already kind of concerned about DC already having 2 to 3 more absolute books. It's at what point does the line get so big somebody's not buying all of it? And that's the thing, though, is it's always a balance between, it's okay, this is working. We have to commit so much to it, but not too much to it.
Right. Because then it's like anything. If you have 7 children and you're only focusing on 3 of them, 4 of them are going by the wayside, right? You've got to take care of all 7 of them. And so it's hard because no one has that staff anymore. No one has the bandwidth to be able to really, and that I think is a big part of it. Everyone's has limited staff, limited funds, limited time anymore. But I think it's true. And I hope that we can all strike the right balance, right? That's going to be the key.
This just reminds me of there's the Tim Burton Mars Attacks movie. There's this line where Jack Nicholson, who's playing the president, he's talking about how he's like, the one branch of the government has been destroyed, and he's like, but he says, he's like, but 2 out of 3 ain't bad. And I was just like,
That's
oh my
right.
God. You're talking about an alien invasion. You're like kind of talking about how it's not so bad because at least we still got the executive branch and whatever else. It's
because he's a part of the executive branch.
exactly. He's very pro executive branch right then. He's not dead by aliens. You know, one thing I'm curious about, I often bring this up with retailers just because it helps like reference a little bit, because 2020 to like 2022, there was that pandemic bump. And then 2023, there was a bit of a fall off, and like maybe 2024 is kind of flattened out from there. How does that compare to, how are things seeming, especially when it comes to top sellers compared to like 2019? Is it comparable, in range, worse, better? What's your sense of that?
I think it's funny. It depends, right? So what we've found is, I mean, we're still up from 2019. So that's what's important. The numbers have shifted, and it kind of depends on, it has kind of leveled out. So our biggest sellers that used to be our biggest sellers in 2019 aren't necessarily, they're still our biggest sellers. But I think what I've seen in most of it is that we're seeing less people buying those biggest sellers, and they're starting to try other things. So it's kind of spreading out. But in certain instances, we're not seeing that. If somebody's a Batman person, they're buying, if there are 5 covers, they'll buy 5 covers. If there are 2 covers, they'll buy 2 covers. So I don't, the unfortunate thing is that these multiple covers are just a lot. And I don't think that I think they're helping the publishers financially, but I don't think they're helping readership in any way. And I feel like there's going to be a pretty big change in the way retailers start buying those. We're going to always offer them. And so it's this vicious cycle, right? I was just telling the team this morning, because DCBS offers everything that's offered. Then people buy it and they order it. And so then the publisher makes it, and the publisher says, well, people are buying it, so we're going to continue to do it. But the problem is, like, right, it's just a big circle. And so the thing is, I don't want to be the retailer that says I'm not offering those, because that's what ends up happening. But if there were enough retailers that said we're not going to, and the collective retailer group says we're not buying these anymore, then they'll stop making them, and they're going to have to figure something else out. But we're worried about what that means. So we all just keep going around in our circle.
Yeah, you're waiting for everyone to agree simultaneously without talking about it that we're not doing this anymore. It is, we were talking a little bit before we started recording about readers versus collectors. Like, I'm like you, I'm a reader. I mean, I have, like, I have stuff. I have lots of stuff.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, I have it because I read it and I loved it and I kept it. But then there's also like the variants versus regular covers. And it is interesting where they're all part of the same ecosystem and they all help sustain it. But there are certain parts of it where it's just, I don't know, it's kind of like what you were talking about with the nostalgia thing. And I was talking about the microlines thing, where it's like, if you overcommit to it, does it stop being as valuable as it originally was and starts becoming somewhat of a problem?
Right. Well, and I think it is. What's funny is, if you talk to anybody who is not in comics and you told them that you sell comics, and a person buys a comic and buys the exact same comic with just a different cover, I have told people that, and they're like, what? Are these people crazy? What's going on? Like, it does seem kind of crazy when you think about it. And it's like, well, it's a collector mentality. That's what that is. But there are genuinely people, like, when I read a comic, if I walk into a store, I'll just look and see which cover I like better. As long, if I know that it's, so I'm not the collector, but I'm going to read the one that I like the cover the best.
I'm the person who, at my shop, I literally have in my pull only A covers. And it's not that I don't like any variant covers or something like that. It's just easier, and it also prevents me from getting a comic where it's like, this is a Jean Grey comic, but it has Ghost Rider on the front of it for some reason. And I'm like, I don't need that. I don't want to look at the comic and be like, I don't know what this is. This is confusing.
Right.
Just a few more questions on the DCBS and in-stocks aside. You mentioned DC Finest. What have you seen with the compact comics and compendiums? Because I've been kind of obsessed with like the format variation this year, because I actually think I don't know, I love it.
Yeah. No. And honestly, they're going ridiculous. It's so funny because the compact comics specifically were actually created by DC to be in like more mass market, right? Like I think their thought was airports, getting them in smaller spaces that, and the direct market was like, nope, this is ours, man. And they just like took over. We keep like DC keeps transferring in and reprinting these compact comics, and they're going bonkers. I love them because I like a smaller book. I think it's much easier to read. And I think that they figured out the exact right way to do it. So it doesn't feel like it's taken anything away from the actual comic itself. But those, weren't technically meant for like they weren't made for the direct market, but the direct market really, they were like, yeah, no, I think readers like them and people just in general who don't see that they're not beholden to a specific size of a comic.
Yeah. Near as I can tell, they're kind of working for everybody, which is a good thing, which is a very good thing. I've never actually asked this. How does manga do for in-stock trades? Is that a big part of what you do?
It has been. It used to be huge. And then right before the pandemic, the only problem with manga is it is so hard to keep in stock because it goes out of print. And it's tough. There isn't like one great distributor for manga. Like even Diamond was great for years, and they still had a hard time keeping all of it in stock. And we would order from Simon and Schuster sometimes, but the shipping wasn't great. Like as far as like getting it in good condition, because they just throw it in a box because they didn't see probably what our customer saw as the value in getting it in good condition. But manga did not like explode for us the way it did everyone else during the pandemic.
That makes sense, actually.
Everything did. That's the thing. Everything did. So it was like, it all just went crazy. So there was no one specific thing where we were like,
Yeah. I feel like you need to start a fourth business. It's called out of stock trades. And then you can actually sell manga whenever you get it in.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is interesting. I kind of actually think that the fact that it didn't pop in the same way as it did for others makes a certain amount of sense, because it did seem like a lot of what led to the manga boom was like people getting really obsessed with Crunchyroll and people getting really obsessed with like streaming services where they can watch all this manga and then be like, I need to watch the next Spy Family. I can't because it doesn't exist yet. I have to go buy these things. I'm going to go somewhere to do that because I don't know where to buy that. And it's like, that's almost like your new reader problem is like, they don't know to look for you, which is kind of, it is a funky thing. You're like in this nebulous zone where you're doing well, but it's like building is the difficulty. But I guess that's the same problem for everybody, right?
Yeah. And like Barnes and Noble is really good at manga.
Oh yeah.
Like they figured it out. And young people many people read manga, but a lot of young people read manga, and especially like teenage girls, right? Which everyone would love them as readers because they will spend money like nobody's business. And Barnes and Noble's figured it out. They were like, oh, this is easy. We're just going to end cap them. We're going to just blow this whole place out with it and keep it in stock. And because they had the power to keep those in stock, they really were able to kind of corner the market. And so people didn't really even look. And during the pandemic, to be fair, Amazon had always been a big in-stock trades competitor, like because they were really discounting stuff similar to what we were, and they stopped doing it. And that's another reason that we did, crazy numbers during the pandemic, because Amazon was getting actual things that needed to get to people, and they weren't focusing on things like that.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I will say it's not just teenage girls. It's also 40-year-old men in Anchorage, Alaska that still tell themselves that they're still young. I'm not speaking about anybody in particular. I've been reading a lot more manga this year, Christina.
No specific person, right?
No specific person.
Yeah. Well, and my point is that tends to be the entry point. So if we could just figure out a way to get the teenage girls, because they don't seem to go anywhere else. Like some do definitely go into comics, but there are way more manga readers than there are comics readers. And we just have to figure out how to get the people, and it can be anybody in that age range that hooks onto manga like that, to get them to transition to regular American comics.
I don't know how old the aforementioned Savannah is, but I feel like you need to like hire her as like the vice president of new business or new reader acquisition,
new business strategy.
Just
or whatever.
put stuff in front of her and be like, "Would this move the needle for you?
Would this move? Do you think? Yeah, well, she is, let me see, she's 26, so she's
Okay.
still very young. Our youngest is 19, and she is not like she's read comics, but she's never really like gotten into them. But of course, her boyfriend, all about Spider-Man and whatever, and now he's reading Invincible and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, we still it's a tough nut to crack that the Gen Zers are even worse than the millennials at trying to figure out how to get them to read comics.
Thank you for saying that. That makes me feel much better as an elder
Yeah.
millennial, I believe I'm
Yeah.
called. I am curious. Let's talk about your other hat, Christina, the lunar side.
Okay.
Are these problems that you see at DCBS, or like the pluses and minuses, not just the problems, are those pretty comparable to what you see as a distributor as well?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, you're seeing it from a different side.
Yeah. It's actually surprising. Like, I think because we've always had fairly good relationships with the publishers on the DCBS side, it allows us as a distributor to be like probably more honest than we should be sometimes. But I think it's good. You know, a publisher may disagree with you, or disagree with me. I think a lot of what we see is the retailers struggle with the exact same thing as what we do at DCBS. And they just want the publishers to understand, and the publishers do understand, but they understand in the grand scope of hearing it from thousands of other people, right? I think now that DC and Marvel are very big and very corporate, and we are but a blip to their corporations.
Right.
You know, the comic side. And I think retailers sometimes have a hard time with that because we see it ourselves as the punk kids that, you know, like are punk rock. We're doing the, you know, God's work, small grassroots type of stuff. And we want them to feel the same way and be the same way, and they can't be.
Right. But also to value enough to give the attention that everyone wants and deserves. Like wants
Right.
they want the attention. Yeah, that is a tricky balance. You know, it's funny. I actually just Googled this just to be sure. This month is officially 4 years since you became the sole distributor for DC. It's because there was like the 6-month window, which I think a lot of people probably don't even remember, where it was you and UCS that came out of nowhere to like kind of fill the gap for DC.
Mm-hmm.
I am curious as to what's the biggest things you've learned during that period? Because 4 years during a pandemic, during a lot of transition, during all kinds of stuff, that's a lot.
It is a lot. The thing that I've learned is that everybody cares so much that sometimes it's to our own detriment.
Like as far as like all the stakeholders are concerned, really?
Yeah, we are very thrilled to be a part of it, never having the intention of being a part of this part of the, you know, the puzzle, so to speak, or the part of the chain. The thing that I've learned most is that, well, especially in 4 years, we're all still trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's no one has fully figured it out. I feel like, you know, in in Dogma, where Salma Hayek is explaining to them that like religion, like no one's really figured it out. That's how I feel like the comics industry is.
Sure.
Like like everyone has, so like almost every publisher has some things that they do right and then others that they do wrong. And they're all very different, and everyone's kind of figured it out, but no one's actually figured out the secret formula. And it is unfortunate that there are so many cogs in the machine that you never feel like when one is working really well, there's always one that's not. And you, as a retailer, I think people would be shocked by the number of things that go wrong that they never know about, and thankfully don't, by the way, because they would probably be like Chicken Little all the time, like the sky is falling and nothing's ever gonna, you know, work. And it's kind of surprising how much you have to like just take on and just figure out like on a day-to-day basis. Like I've never put more fires out in my life. I don't know how Diamond did it, you know, like continually for for, 40 years. And it's fine. It's just that because it is, as a distributor, you are on both sides. Like as a retailer, you just go to your distributor and say, hey, like this is wrong, or this needs done, or this should be fixed, or what about this, or give me this information. And as a distributor, you have to deal with trucks, and you have to deal with logistics of getting it to you, and you have to deal with the publishers, and you have to deal with retailers, and you want to make sure that all of those are like, working correctly. And you're probably the one that's making the least amount of margin of anybody in the group. But it's still worth it because it's more important than not having the right distributors out there, I guess.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Zoop is where some of the biggest names in comics are crowdfunding. Live campaigns this month include The Art of Dave Dorman, Camilla de Erico's Paroby art book, with Megaton Man Omnibus from Fantagraphics and Don Simpson, Mulch from Steve McGarry and Rick Stromowski, and more. More campaigns are coming soon to Zoop from Joe Quesada, Alex Segura, Michael Marisi, Dean Kotz, as well as the relaunch of Hack Slash the card game on Zoop's partner platform, GameFound. Zoop would like to thank all the creators who have recently submitted projects and urge more creators to submit your project to Zoop. Click the Submit Your Project link at zoop.gg, as they are providing services to even more creators than ever before. And now, back to the show. Well, and then there's always, like you mentioned, like things that people just don't know about. Like one of the big topics for the last few years has been metadata. And so it's like,
right.
You're somebody on your team, I don't know whom, probably has to be involved with like the Comet standard that's coming together.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like, those are things, it's like, you can't plan for having to work to standardize metadata, but that's also a necessary thing because it makes everything better and easier for everyone. It's funny, though. I was thinking about this for DCBS. I think it's true for all of your things. I mean, maybe it's true for everybody, for all things, too. But I imagine you get so many inputs on both sides, whether it's from publishers or it's from retailers or it's from whomever, that one of the trickiest parts of your job is like, what do I really want to act upon? And what do I need to deprioritize because you can't do everything?
That's true. It's also a matter of, is this something, there are a lot of times where it's like, should we bring this to the publisher? Like this sort of feedback, right? And we always provide, like if somebody says, hey, I want you to tell DC, or I want you to tell Image, or I want you to tell, like we always do. But sometimes like there will be certain retailers who like weekly want us to provide this feedback. And we're like, okay, we have to like kind of aggregate it with all the other feedback and go, oh, this is something we're seeing from more than just one retailer. So this is a concern that we need to bring up. Or, well, and that is a very specific, but there are so many things just on a day-to-day basis, like getting something in on trucks and saying, wait, this doesn't look right. Or what, because the team, does their check-in, and then they'll put, we message everything through Slack, and they'll put something in the Slack channel that's like, hey, we think this is a printer defect. And then, it's like an all hands on deck. We got to get to the publisher, and we got to get it to the printer. And there are just a lot of things that no one knows happens on the back end before they even get their books. And it's a lot of work and a lot of like making decisions that you hope are always right.
Mm-hmm.
And in our case, it's always on the retailer side. Like it's never going to be, and we're always going to be good partners to our publishers. But if we think it's something that's going to affect our retailers adversely, they're going to hear about it from us. And our publishers are great partners, and they will discuss it with us and say, okay, yeah, I think you're right. This is what we need to do with this. But it's difficult because it's all, we get the books in and we're picking them the next day. Like there's no like, we got a few days to figure stuff out. That's not how it is, because we're weekly. Like and the same thing happens with retailers who have to pick, get those books in and turn them around and make sure that they have the right things and they're on the right places.
Yeah, there's only so much time you can dedicate to something when you're constantly on to the next week and on to the next week and on to the next week. This does make me feel like I need to reach out to every retailer I know and tell them that I think that you need to tell Christina to tell DC the Android version of Our Man needs to come back. Obviously, you need to forget this conversation happened when you start getting all that feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That does make me wonder. Obviously, you can't get too much into this, but DC is back to Wednesdays. How much of that was you passing feedback on? Like, was that part of the feedback they were getting, was you hearing from shops being like,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. I mean, it had to have been a daily basis. We had people complaining about Wednesday. And I think that Image deciding to stay on Wednesday when they came on was another thing that helped DC make that decision. Honestly, that transition was difficult, though, once we went back to Wednesday, because, we had to change our entire warehouse structure because of when the trucks would come in a day later, and then we had to change the pick and that all worked and it was fine. But what it did is it shifted retailers. We had been getting things to retailers so early, like sometimes 5 days before on sale, which was amazing. And by shifting it that one day, it went over a weekend. And so it shifted some people more than one day, depending on when they would get it, because FedEx doesn't deliver on a Saturday, Sunday to commercial locations. So that was a little snafu in that whole thing, but it is much easier, I think, for retailers. And that was the big amount of feedback was, look, people are tired of doing a Sunday FOC and a Monday FOC. And, retailers only have so many hours in the day to have to decide and carve out time to place these orders. And there were a lot of stores that were saying, look, I'm not even putting them out on DC books out on Tuesday anyway. But then you had just as many people, and I should say just as many, we had people who also said, Tuesday was great for me have DC on Tuesday because I sold DC books on Tuesday. And then, I don't know what the right answer for that was, but it was definitely for retailers. I think Wednesday was still the right answer.
I mean, it's like with any of these things, you talk to 10 different shops, you're going to get 10 different answers about what the precise right answer is. And like, I remember there's this one shop I talked to, Impulse Creations. Impulse, they were all about Tuesday and they were kind of bummed and moved on. But literally everyone else I talked to was like, hell yeah, let's go back to Wednesday. That was great. It is interesting because like, there's always like weird stuff that happens. Like a good example of this is Kieran Gillen and Casper Wingard's The Power Fantasy recently launched. And there was a weird quirk where the first issue arrived to Lunar shops one week, and then the next week it arrived at Diamond shops that ordered Image through that. That's like the behind the scenes stuff that you're talking about, where there's all these like quirky things that are happening. And it seems like a lot of times you're like Firefighter Christina, where you're just like, I'm doing my best I can to keep my head over water.
Yeah, that is my life. For that example, sometimes what happens is the printer says it's not ready.
Yeah.
And they'll just tell us, hey, it's not ready. And we're like, but it has to be ready because we have to start picking it like it has to be ready. And with Power Fantasy, I think specifically what happened is there was a printing issue with, I think it was cover B. And the way that we pick is we pick earlier than Diamond starts their pick. But we were able in some way for the printer to get it to us because we are closer or something, instead of them getting it to Olive Branch. So that, because they're a wholesaler, I think that's, they really need to, we're able, and they're able to say, okay, we're going to just ship it to you a week later. We set the OSD, right? We set that on sale date. And if Diamond decides, okay, it didn't get to us on time, we're going to push it. We don't push it. They can push it. Vice versa, though, they can't put anything out before we do. So if we say this title is getting pushed, then they need to push it because that is the Image date. And that was an unfortunate circumstance where I think the printer said, yeah, we're going to get it to them on time. And I don't think they did. And so Diamond, and we had already been picking them. Like we were already in the process, so we couldn't pull it back at that point. And Diamond had to just hold it for the next week.
I mean, those are those cascading effects things that are just like something happens and then something else happens. It's a domino effect. Okay, I have to bring this up because you've said this word a lot. Picking. Picking is basically you grabbing inventory for distribution. Is that the case or what is it?
Yeah, I mean, that when I'm talking about picking, I'm talking our employees standing at a pick line picking the orders. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's funny because like everyone's got different terms for this sort of stuff. And so you kept saying picking. And I was like, I think I know what that is, but I should probably ask. Just one more question involving all this. We've talked about this. One of the curious things, like I was talking to a retailer about having you on and he was super stoked because he loves you and he thinks you're great.
Oh.
But then, like, there's all kinds of other stuff. Everyone's got different takes on different things. What goes into the actual managing of relationships with retailers and publishers? Like, how much of your day is not the picking and the managing all of the timelines and things like that, and just relationship management, basically?
I probably do more relationship management with the publishers, like on a one-on-one basis, than Cameron does. He does a lot more of the like web stuff, even though it's funny, with DCBS and Insect Trades, I kind of took over DCBS and he kind of took over Insect Trades as those were kind of our babies. And so we've done the same thing on the Lunar side where he kind of, DC is his thing and Image is mine. And so we both have great relationships with both publishers, but like I tend to be more the relationship person and like oversee it more. As far as retailer relations, the customer service department does that, and Emily is my director of customer service is much better at that and knowing. But the difference between us and like a Diamond or a PRH is that my team has access to me all day long because I'm in the warehouse, like I'm in the office in the warehouse. Cameron actually is still in Memphis, so they also have access to him, but it's by phone. And so if they have an issue that comes up, like I am immediately taking care of it. And whether it's a retailer, whether it's a print issue, whether it's, whatever. But my team also has access to me. And so it's more the relationship building of my team and kind of managing them and how they manage their publishers as well.
Yeah.
So they'll come in and say, hey, this happened today. I don't know how to handle this. And then I'll just kind of walk them through, okay, this is what we need to say. This is our policy. We need to remind them of this. And then we need to let them know that these are the solutions we've come up with. And it's mostly that. That most of my days are things like that. Now, to be fair, lately it hasn't been because we're still waiting for Diamond. Diamond, I think, finally sent us our last trucks of Image backlist over a year later. And so we are still like managing that whole, like getting it in and processing it and making sure it's available to all our retailers. Once that's been my whole year is the Image transition. And it's gone well. It would have been better if, we had some things that were a little more communicative with Diamond. Because we really never knew where we were. Like we were like, how much are we still getting kind of thing. But we finally, are closing that transition, which is good because then we know, okay, it's like we have breathing room now. And we can like assess because right now I'm out of warehouse space. Like I have 0 warehouse space in Lunar. In fact, I had to get another warehouse for offsite storage.
I was going to say, I think I read an article about that like a year and a half ago or something like that. I remember when you opened up that.
Yeah, well, and we've been in this building for 3 years. So
okay, maybe that was it.
We are now at the point where we are looking at land to build because we have to double the warehouse space that we have if we want to grow in any way. So like every publisher that's been on my wait list for the last 2 years is still on that wait list because Image needed to be right. It needed to be done. It needed to be clean and functioning exactly the way it needs to be. And that's how I am with my warehouse. Like the operations manager will come to me and say, look, don't you dare give me another publisher.
We're out of room.
And it's true. And it's very easy for a big corporation to just say, figure it out. But when I'm here, I know, and I know that it's important to only give them what they can handle and then, manage it from there.
It's so funny. I feel like space is like a secret problem for every facet of the comic book world. It's like comic readers, they're like, where am I going to put all this stuff? Comic shops, where am I going to put all this stuff? Distributors, where am I going to put all this stuff? Yeah, it's really funny. I also think it's kind of funny. Not funny. This is not great for you, but I apologize that I said it was funny. You talk about your firefighting and all the stuff you're doing for Lunar, and that's only part of your job. You still got to firefight for DCBS, so it's a good thing you're apparently an excellent multitasker.
I have to give credit to Mackenzie and now Adam. So Mackenzie runs the DCBS warehouse, and honestly, I barely have to. Like she is running it, and they are running themselves so efficiently that I rarely have to be involved.
Oh, that's awesome.
So as far as firefighting for them, not a lot. In fact, I have neglected them for Lunar, and I do feel bad about it because I know that they're good, right? And they'll still come to me and say, hey, we need this, or what about this? And we have our quarterly meetings. In Stock Trades was managed by Emily, a different Emily. We have two Emilys, and she did not love managing the warehouse because she had been Cameron's executive assistant for years. But she really knew in stock, and she was, able to take care of that. And then her husband left Walmart. He had been at Walmart distribution and was like essentially efficiency expert. Like he'd go in and get teams working and managing them. And so now he's actually managing our in-stock trades warehouse. And Emily has come back and now is Cameron and I's executive assistant. And she's incredible because she keeps me on my toes. And I have not had an assistant for a couple of years now. And I really need one because of all the firefighting. So, and to be fair, I would have missed this podcast today if it weren't for her coming and running to me and going, didn't you have this at 3? It's 5 minutes away. And I need somebody like that because I'm old now and I forget things a lot.
I do want to say, you can tell that I'm a marketer because when you said that you've neglected DCBS, my brain autocorrected to, no, you've empowered them. You've empowered them.
I have. And that is the problem that Cameron and I both have, especially me, because I'm in the warehouse, is that we are both control freaks. So it's tough. Like sometimes they have to come to me and go, look, like you already have enough on your plate. Stop trying to take more on and let me do these things. And when I left for Italy, that was, it's the first time I didn't take my computer with me. And it's the first time since I've had Lunar that I was away for 10 days and I only had a telephone in my hand. And I did email every morning and checked on stuff, but I generally, I said, no, you guys have to make your decisions and I trust you. I feel that you can make those decisions. You know, in my heart, what we need and what we should be doing. And that's it. I'm finally getting to that point with Lunar. I'm still a control freak. I always will be, but I'm just less of one.
Well, you understand yourself, but I have to say that is really good. That's great growth because I'm a firm believer that if you go on vacation, you're on vacation. Whenever I leave, I always tell my coworkers, I'm like, if you need anything, figure it out yourself. I'm gone. Leave me alone. And I will give one person like a break glass in case of emergency option, but I'm like, don't use it. And most of the time they don't. And I love that. All right. I know you got a lot going on. So let's close out with one big question. You're a distributor. You have a view of the direct market from that perspective. You're a retailer, so you have a view of the direct market from that perspective. What is your overall outlook for where things are headed? Obviously, you're looking for more new readers, but are you optimistic about where things are at? Is it kind of too soon to tell? Where are you at these days?
I think, especially with Ultimate Spider-Man and Absolute Batman, I think those are two very big indicators. They've done well this year. They're like breathing new life into people who have been buying for a while as well. Energon Universe, obviously, right? But I also think what I'd like to see, I'm optimistic about those things. What I'd like to see and what I feel like I'd like to see more is getting back to stuff that I like to read. Not that I won't read, but I haven't read Ultimate Spider-Man. I haven't read Absolute Batman. I am an Image and Vertigo girl through and through. I want to see a little more diversity in like slice of life, even just different horror, even different, I want to see more diversity because I feel like the comic industry as a whole, if I read another post-apocalyptic book, I'm going to blow my brains out. and I don't mind post-apocalyptic, but I want something that's like fresh and new and it can still be really screwed up and really like messed up. But I want to see more of that.
It's funny you mentioned slice of life. Somebody asked me for my mailbag. They talked about how horror is having like this big moment the last few years where it's like doing really well seemingly, and there's a really big push on it. And they asked me what genre I would like to see more of. I said slice of life. I actually think that it's a very underrated.
Absolutely.
It's a very underrated genre, and I think people think of it as not something that does well in the direct market, but like I think you could say like Invincible, kind of a slice of life book. The current Ultimate Spider-Man, kind of a slice of life book. There's a bunch of books that have done really well, and I have like a whole list in like my answer that are kind of slice of life books. And I think people forget about that. I mean, like Marvel's whole thing is kind of slice of life. I think they've kind of forgotten that a little bit. And I think that is a genre that is really underrated in the space. And I agree with you. If you overdo, it goes back to the balance we're talking about with those other things. If you don't have that balance, you get too much of one thing and like you kind of chase away readers in a weird way.
You do. And the thing is, then they also can't decide. Like if they're seeing the same stuff, then they're like, oh, I don't even know if I'm going to try that because that doesn't seem, like it would interest me. The things that got me into comics, I mean, were things that were familiar, right? So like Mystery Quarterly. So I liked pulp. I liked noir type stuff. And so that's what Cameron handed me. But then I read Preacher and like was instantly hooked. But then after that, he would just hand me anything. Like I read Transmet, which wouldn't have been anything that I probably would have just looked at the cover and picked up. So I think that's what we're missing is like all of those are very different. Mm-hmm. But then when I read Essex County, I cried like a baby. Like, so those are the types of things I like as well. And I think that Cameron's like that right now. He's been reading like a bunch of murder mysteries and he in between his comics. But I think as a comic reader or just a reader in general, I want readers. I love comic readers. I'm happy with collectors, but I want readers, like people who are just like tear through a book in a day or two and then they want to go for a next one. But even I like got on this bent where I had to like start giving myself something to cleanse my palate. And I don't think we have those palate cleansers anymore. I don't think we have those things that people can go to and feel comfort and like get like emotional about. And I'm not seeing that as much.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the first quarter to some degree, where it's like there's preconceived notions about what works and what doesn't and how things work. Mm-hmm. And how it worked once is how it's always going to work. But I hope that they listen because I want that stuff too. But Christina, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about Lunar, DCBS, comics, and everything else. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Of course, anytime.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with the co-owner of DCBS, In Stock Trades, and Lunar Distribution, Christina Merkler. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman for stepping in to edit this episode. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketch at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketch on social media by following it on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic or following me at @SlicedFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including David Byrne, Milton Lawson, David Wilson, Joe, Benjamin Wilkins, Chris Hacker, John Neesmith, John Auerbach, Dustin Weaver, Ninja Assassin Love Story Webcomic, Brandon Heyman, Aiden Hammond, Kenny Myers, Faith Aaron Hicks, Ah Yeah Comics, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Danny Ollie, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polges, Tom Evans, Reed Beeman, Kelly Zudakonic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Holt, Near Levy, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Django Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Domstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Petra Coyle, Isaac Oren, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Vandeven, Submen Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePills, Patrick Power, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Leona Kangas, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Stephen Holt, Philip Myra, Chris Pacello, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwand, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Jason Nassy, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Brawley, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Adam Heifel, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nicolo, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Odd Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.